The autumn of 1889 had settled upon London with particular melancholy, wrapping our familiar quarters in Baker Street with that peculiar combination of coal smoke and Thames mist which seems to muffle not only sound, but thought itself. I had spent the better part of the morning reviewing my notes on a recent case involving a missing racehorse, a matter which Holmes had resolved with his characteristic blend of observation and logic, when I became aware that my friend had abandoned his chemical experiments in favor of his violin. The instrument sang with that low, mournful tone which I had learned to associate with periods of mental vacancy, those intervals between cases when Holmes's restless intellect, deprived of suitable stimulation, turned inward upon itself. He stood by the window, his tall, spare figure silhouetted against the grey light, drawing his bow across the strings with the mechanical precision of a man whose thoughts were elsewhere entirely. "You are restless, Holmes," I observed, setting aside my pen. "Perhaps we might take a constitutional despite the weather." "Restless?" He paused in his playing, one eyebrow arched in that familiar expression of mild reproach. "My dear Watson, I am never restless. I am merely expectant. The criminal classes of London cannot remain dormant indefinitely, and when they do bestir themselves, they invariably present problems of sufficient complexity to engage our attention." As if summoned by his words, the sharp rap of knuckles upon our door interrupted the morning's quiet. Mrs. Hudson's voice echoed up the 17 steps, announcing a visitor with that particular note of urgency which suggested official business. "Inspector Lestrade to see you, gentlemen," she called. "Says it's a matter of considerable importance." Holmes set down his violin with evident satisfaction. "Ah, Watson, it would appear that London's criminal element has heard my complaint and taken steps to remedy it." The inspector's dilemma. Lestrade entered with the brisk efficiency that characterized his movements, though I noted immediately that his usually confident demeanor showed signs of strain. His weather-beaten features bore the expression of a man who had encountered something beyond his considerable experience, and he clutched his hat with the unconscious grip of one seeking familiar comfort in uncertain circumstances. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he began without preamble, "I find myself in the unusual position of requiring your assistance with a case that has left both myself and my colleagues at Scotland Yard thoroughly perplexed." Holmes gestured toward a chair, his grey eyes already bright with interest. "Pray be seated, Inspector. You have come directly from Hampstead. I observe traces of the particular clay found in that district upon your boots, and your coat bears the unmistakable aroma of old parchment and leather bindings. You have been examining a library or study, and recently—" Lestrade's eyebrows rose in that familiar expression of amazement which Holmes's deductive abilities never failed to inspire. "Quite right, Mr. Holmes. I have indeed come from Hampstead, from the residence of one Professor Armitage Blackwood, a gentleman of considerable learning and, until yesterday morning, apparently robust health." "Until yesterday morning," I interjected, my medical training immediately alert to the implications. "The professor was discovered dead in his private study by his housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, when she brought his morning tea. The door was locked from the inside, the key upon the carpet just within the threshold. A pistol lay beside the body, and the preliminary examination suggests death by his own hand." Holmes had begun that characteristic pacing which indicated his mind was already engaged with the problem. "And yet, Inspector, you are here, which suggests that this apparent suicide presents certain irregularities." "Indeed it does, Mr. Holmes." Lestrade reached into his coat and withdrew a leather portfolio. Professor Blackwood was a scholar of ancient languages and cryptography, a man whose life was devoted to the decipherment of historical texts and codes. His colleagues describe him as methodical, precise, and entirely devoted to his work. Not, one would think, the sort of man to take his own life without considerable provocation. And was there such provocation? Holmes inquired, pausing in his movement to fix the inspector with his penetrating stare. "None that we can discover." His financial affairs were in excellent order. His health, according to his physician, was sound, and he had recently completed a significant scholarly work on ancient Mesopotamian scripts. But here, gentlemen, is where the matter becomes truly extraordinary. Lestrade opened his portfolio and produced a carefully preserved sheet of parchment. Even from across the room I could see that it bore a series of strange markings. Not letters or numbers as I understood them, but a collection of intricate symbols that seemed to follow no recognizable pattern. This was found clutched in the professor's right hand, Lestrade continued. Written, according to our analysis, in his own blood, though how he managed to obtain and use such an implement remains unclear. The symbols are unlike anything our people have encountered, and we've consulted with experts from the British Museum and the Oriental Institute. None can make heads or tails of it. Holmes accepted the parchment with the reverent care of a scholar handling an ancient manuscript. His examination was thorough and methodical, his sharp eyes tracing each symbol with intense concentration. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the soft whisper of turning paper and the distant sounds of London's morning traffic. "Fascinating," he murmured at length. "Professor Blackwood, you said." "I believe I recall the name, a contributor to the Journal of Ancient Scripts, if memory serves. A man of considerable reputation in his field." "The very same," Lestrade confirmed, "and which makes this all the more puzzling. Why would such a methodical scholar leave behind a message that no one can read? It seems almost vindictive." Holmes looked up sharply, his eyes bright with sudden interest. "Vindictive, Inspector? An intriguing choice of words. Tell me, what was the professor's domestic situation? Did he live alone?" "With his housekeeper and a young assistant, one Mr. Timothy Ashford, who helped with his research. Both are thoroughly respectable individuals who had served the professor faithfully for several years." "And his recent work? You mentioned a significant scholarly achievement." "A translation of certain Babylonian tablets, I believe. Mr. Ashford could provide more details, but it was apparently a matter of considerable importance to academic circles." Holmes folded the parchment carefully and returned it to Lestrade's portfolio. "Inspector, I believe we are dealing with something far more complex than a simple suicide. This message, for message it surely is, represents the final act of a man who knew his time was limited and took extraordinary measures to ensure his last communication would survive." "You believe it can be deciphered?" Lestrade asked, hope evident in his voice. "I believe, Inspector, that Professor Blackwood intended it to be deciphered, but only by someone with the knowledge and determination to unravel his final puzzle. Watson, we shall need our coats. A visit to Hampstead is in order, and I suspect we shall find that the professor's death is merely the beginning of a most intriguing mystery." As we prepared to depart, Holmes paused at the mantelpiece to select several reference volumes from his extensive collection. "Tell me, Inspector," he said without turning, "was anything found to be missing from the professor's study? Any indication that the room had been searched?" "Now that you mention it," Lestrade replied slowly, "Mrs. Pemberton did say that certain papers from his desk appeared to be missing. Research notes, she thought, though she couldn't be certain." Holmes nodded with evident satisfaction. "Then we have our first confirmation, Watson. Professor Blackwood did not die by his own hand, but rather fell victim to someone who sought something specific from his research. The cipher in blood is not a suicide note. It is an accusation, carefully crafted to survive when all other evidence has been destroyed." The fog had begun to lift as we made our way to the waiting hansom, but I could not shake the feeling that we were about to enter a mystery far more complex and dangerous than its scholarly trappings might suggest. The professor's last cipher beckoned like a challenge from beyond the grave, and I knew that only Holmes's remarkable intellect stood between us and the truth that someone had been willing to kill to conceal. The hansom cab carried us through the increasingly refined streets that led northward from Baker Street toward Hampstead, the fog lifting gradually to reveal the handsome Georgian facades that housed London's intellectual elite. As we traveled, Holmes maintained that thoughtful silence which I had learned to associate with the preliminary stages of his mental processes, though I noted his keen eyes continued to observe the passing scene with characteristic intensity. "Holmes," I ventured as we paused at a crossing, "you spoke of the professor's cipher as a deliberate challenge, but surely if he intended it to be read, he would have chosen a more conventional means of communication." My friend's attention was momentarily diverted by a stout gentleman emerging from a tobacconist's shop, lighting an expensive cigar with evident satisfaction. "Observe that fellow, Watson," Holmes said quietly. "What do you deduce about his circumstances?" I studied the man carefully. A person of some means, judging by his attire and the quality of his cigar. His florid complexion suggests a fondness for good living, and his purposeful stride indicates a man with pressing business. "All accurate as far as they go," Holmes replied, "but consider the finer details. Note the slight scuff on the left brim of his otherwise new bowler hat, consistent with frequently brushing against a low doorway. His right sleeve bears a faint smudge of printer's ink, barely visible, and his fingernails, though clean, show traces of recent contact with lead type. The expensive Havana he enjoys was clearly lit inside the shop, as he carries no matches, yet the small pouch of common tobacco he purchased suggests his personal preferences run to more modest fare. Therefore, I prompted, knowing a revelation was imminent. A typesetter, or printer by trade, recently employed in a small establishment with low ceilings. The expensive cigar was likely a gift from a satisfied client, but his true station is revealed by his actual purchase. A simple demonstration, Watson, of how every detail, however trifling, contributes to the larger picture. So it shall be with our professor. Each element must be examined not in isolation, but as part of a carefully constructed narrative. The house on Willoughby Lane. Professor Blackwood's residence proved to be a substantial brick villa set back from the road behind mature elm trees, their bare November branches casting intricate shadows across the frost-touched lawn. The house spoke of comfortable academic prosperity, with its ivy-clad walls and the warm glow of gas lamps visible through the tall windows. Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper, greeted us at the door with the composed dignity of one accustomed to scholarly visitors, though I detected the telltale signs of recent distress in the careful way she held herself. She was a woman of perhaps 50 years, with iron-grey hair arranged in a practical bun and intelligent eyes that spoke of years spent in service to a man of learning. "Inspector, Lestrade said you gentlemen might be calling," she said, ushering us into a hallway lined with bookcases. "I do hope you can make some sense of this dreadful business. The professor was such a methodical man, so devoted to his work. I cannot believe he would do such a thing to himself." Holmes removed his hat with courteous precision. "Mrs. Pemberton, we are here to discover the truth, whatever that may prove to be. I wonder if you might show us to the professor's study." The scene of the crime. The study itself was a scholar's paradise, a large room with tall north-facing windows providing steady light for detailed work. Every wall was lined with books bearing titles in a dozen languages, while the center was dominated by a massive oak desk covered with the implements of academic research. The air held that distinctive mixture of leather bindings, old parchment, and the sharper tang of chemicals that marked it as a place of serious intellectual endeavor. Holmes paused in the doorway, his sharp eyes taking in every detail before stepping carefully across the threshold. The chalk outline on the Persian carpet showed where Professor Blackwood's body had been discovered, positioned between his desk and a comfortable reading chair beside the fireplace. "The door was locked from the inside when you found him?" Holmes inquired, examining the heavy oak portal with its substantial brass lock. "Yes, sir," Mrs. Pemberton replied from the hallway. "I knocked several times when the professor didn't answer my call for breakfast. The door wouldn't open, though I could turn the key. When we finally forced it, we found the professor's key had fallen to the floor inside." Holmes knelt beside the indicated spot, his magnifying glass appearing as if by magic. After a moment's examination, he moved to the key itself, which Lestrade had preserved under glass on a side table. "Interesting," he murmured, indicating with his penknife a series of exceedingly fine scratches along the bit. "Watson, observe these markings, as if the key had been strained by a thread or wire." "But surely the door was locked from within," I protested. "Locked, yes. By which hand remains the question." Holmes crossed to the desk, where I could see that the usual scholarly order had been disturbed. A baize-lined slot that would have held a dispatch box was conspicuously empty, and the lock of a small drawer bore minute scratches suggesting the use of tools. Drawing the blotting book toward him, Holmes shaded across the top sheet with a soft pencil, bringing out in pale relief the ghostly impressions of previous writing. "On no account enter," and "at 9" appeared like words conjured by a magician's wand. "The professor's hand?" I asked. "Undoubtedly. But observe this." He indicated a faint smear along the desk's edge that glistened dully in the light. "Tallow, Watson. The same substance I detected upon the key. Evidence of a most ingenious method for manipulating. The lock from outside the room. The missing research." At that moment, a young man appeared in the doorway, pale, narrow-shouldered, with the ink-stained fingers and slightly myopic squint of one who spent long hours with ancient texts. This could only be Timothy Ashford, the professor's research assistant. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his cultured voice marked by genuine grief. "I am Timothy Ashford. I assisted Professor Blackwood with his research." Holmes turned with evident interest. "Mr. Ashford, your timing is fortuitous. We understand the professor was working on a significant translation project. Babylonian tablets, I believe." The young man's face brightened despite his sorrow. "Indeed, Mr. Holmes. The professor had spent nearly 2 years on a series of tablets that had baffled scholars for decades. They contained references to what appeared to be a lost archive of ancient mathematical and astronomical knowledge. Just last week, he achieved a breakthrough that would have revolutionized our understanding of Mesopotamian science." "And yet," Holmes observed, gesturing toward the empty desk, "all evidence of this work has apparently vanished. Mrs. Pemberton, you mentioned missing papers?" The housekeeper nodded emphatically. "The professor was most particular about his workspace, sir. Every evening he would arrange his current project materials in a specific order on the left side of his desk. Yesterday morning, that entire section was empty, though other papers remained undisturbed." Holmes examined the fireplace, where the remains of recently burned papers lay among the cold ashes. With careful fingers, he extracted a fragment bearing traces of a green wax seal, the partial impression of what appeared to be a serpent wound about a staff. "You are a bicyclist, Mr. Ashford," Holmes observed suddenly, apparently apropos of nothing. The young man colored. "Yes, sir. How did you—" "The chalk upon your trouser cuff and the oil stain at your ankle, combined with the faint imprint of a rat-trap pedal upon your shoe leather. Tell me, did the professor receive any unusual correspondence recently? Any indication that his research had attracted unwelcome attention?" Ashford's expression grew troubled. "He did mention receiving some strange letters, sir. Someone claiming his research was dangerous, though he seemed more amused than concerned. There was also Dr. Lionel Markham from Cambridge. He and the professor had a scholarly dispute that had grown rather heated." "Dr. Markham visited yesterday evening," Mrs. Pemberton added. "Near on 9 o'clock, which was uncommon late. A fine gentleman with a velvet collar, though he had an odd way of tapping his walking stick. 3 precise raps, like a signal." Holmes's eyes sharpened with interest. "Indeed. Inspector Lestrade, I believe we can now state with confidence that Professor Blackwood did not die by his own hand. The evidence is clear. The manipulated lock, the missing research materials, the burned papers, and the cipher written in blood that had already begun to separate, indicating it was composed some time after the fatal wound was inflicted." "Murder, then?" Lestrade asked, though his tone suggested he had already reached the same conclusion. Murder, most certainly, disguised as suicide by someone with both motive and opportunity. The professor's final cipher is not a confession of despair, but an accusation, carefully crafted to survive when all other evidence had been destroyed. Holmes moved toward the door with that decisive energy that marked the beginning of active investigation. "We must speak with Dr. Markham immediately, and I shall require a detailed examination of those threatening letters. The game, as they say, is afoot." As we prepared to leave the scholar's sanctuary, I could not shake the feeling that Professor Blackwood's indecipherable message held secrets that would prove far more dangerous than a simple case of academic rivalry. The quiet world of scholarship had been shattered by violence, and only Holmes's remarkable intellect stood between us and a truth that someone had been willing to kill to conceal. The grey November morning had settled into a persistent drizzle as Holmes and I returned to Professor Blackwood's study, accompanied by Inspector Lestrade, whose practical mind had begun to grasp the implications of my friend's initial observations. The room, now empty of its tragic occupant, seemed to whisper with secrets waiting to be decoded by those with sufficient patience and skill to listen. "Watson," Holmes murmured, producing his magnifying glass with the reverent care of a priest handling sacred relics. The initial examination by Scotland Yard, while thorough in its official capacity, necessarily focused upon the obvious elements of the scene. Now we must attend to what the room itself has to tell us, for every object, every trace of dust, every faint impression speaks volumes to those who understand its language. He knelt beside the chalk outline where Professor Blackwood's body had been discovered, his keen eyes studying the dark stain that marked the carpet. With practiced movements, he produced a small phial and carefully scraped a minute sample of the congealed blood. "The viscosity and coagulation pattern confirm my earlier hypothesis, Watson. This cipher was written some time after the fatal wound was inflicted, when the blood had begun to thicken and separate. Such deliberate composition requires both time and remarkable presence of mind, hardly consistent with the final moments of a dying man." Moving to the heavy Colt revolver that had been found beside the body, Holmes examined it through his handkerchief. "A curious choice for a scholar's final act," he observed. "Not the refined dueling pistol one might expect from a gentleman of Professor Blackwood's station, but a weapon of considerable force and military design. Note the absence of clear fingerprints, only faint smudging consistent with hasty cleaning." His attention then turned to the professor's desk, where the empty, baize-lined slot drew his particular interest. Running a gloved finger along the inner edge, he paused with evident satisfaction. "Observe, Watson, minute fibers of a dark, almost indigo hue, not from the baize itself, which is green, nor from any garment the professor was known to wear. Someone leaned heavily here while forcing the drawer, someone wearing a cloak or coat of distinctive color." The trail to Cambridge. Our examination was interrupted by the arrival of a telegram bearing the Cambridge postmark. Holmes read it with growing interest before passing it to me. "Dr. Lionel Markham has agreed to see us this afternoon," he announced. "It appears our reputation has preceded us, and the good doctor wishes to clarify certain misunderstandings regarding his relationship with Professor Blackwood." The journey to Cambridge provided Holmes with an opportunity to study the reproduced cipher once more, holding the symbols up to the pale light filtering through the carriage windows. "The pattern becomes clearer with each examination, Watson. These are not the random scratches of a dying man, but carefully constructed symbols following some internal logic. This curved mark appears 7 times, always in conjunction with these angular strokes, while this complex figure," he indicated what appeared to be a serpent wound about a vertical staff, "appears at both the beginning and end, suggesting it may serve as both identifier and key." Dr. Markham's chambers. We found Dr. Lionel Markham in his chambers at Trinity College, a man of distinguished bearing whose silver beard and immaculate dress spoke of academic success and social position. His rooms overlooked the great court, their walls lined with the fruits of a lifetime scholarship in Oriental studies. Yet I noted immediately a certain tension in his manner, a watchfulness that suggested our visit was anticipated rather than welcomed. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said, rising from behind a desk laden with ancient texts. "Inspector Lestrade's communication indicated you wished to discuss poor Blackwood's tragic end. A terrible loss to the scholarly community. His work on ancient Mesopotamian scripts was quite remarkable." Holmes accepted the offered chair with characteristic economy of movement. "Indeed, Dr. Markham, we understand you had recent correspondence with Professor Blackwood regarding his latest research. The nature of your scholarly disagreement, if you would be so kind." A shadow crossed the scholar's patrician features. Armitage claimed to have discovered evidence of advanced mathematical and astronomical knowledge among the Babylonians, calculations suggesting they possessed understanding far beyond conventional scholarly attribution. I maintained that his translations were overly interpretive, that he was reading modern concepts into ancient symbols. A serious charge among academics, I observed. "The gravest possible," Markham confirmed, moving to his window. "To suggest a colleague falsifies translations attacks the very foundation of professional reputation. But I felt compelled to speak. Blackwood's claims, if published without proper verification, would overturn decades of established scholarship." Holmes had begun that subtle examination of surroundings I recognized as preliminary to revelation. "You carry a distinctive walking stick, Dr. Markham, ebony with a silver head, the type that might produce a characteristic sound when struck against stone." The scholar's hand moved instinctively toward the implement leaning against his desk. A gift from colleagues upon my appointment to the Oriental Studies chair, but I failed to see the relevance. 3 precise taps, according to Mrs. Pemberton. "Like a signal," she said. "You visited Professor Blackwood yesterday evening at 9 o'clock. I'd written requesting a meeting. Our correspondence had become heated. I hoped face-to-face discussion might resolve our differences." Markham's composure showed the first signs of strain. Unfortunately, our disagreement only intensified. Blackwood remained absolutely convinced of his interpretation, despite what I considered compelling evidence to the contrary. The publisher's connection. Holmes produced the fragment of green wax seal recovered from the fireplace. "Do you recognize this symbol, Dr. Markham? A serpent wound about a staff." The effect was immediate and striking. Markham stepped back from the window as if the small piece of wax posed physical danger. "Where did you find that?" "Among the ashes in Professor Blackwood's fireplace. Papers bearing this seal had been burned. You recognize it?" The device of serpent and staff, Oriental and Scientific Imprints, a publishing house in Paternoster Row. They specialize in scholarly works on ancient subjects. Blackwood had been negotiating with them regarding publication of his Babylonian research. "And the significance of burning such correspondence?" Markham's academic composure cracked further. If Blackwood had signed a contract with them, his research would have been published regardless of scholarly consensus. Serpent and Staff caters to, shall we say, less discriminating audiences. Sensation seekers and amateur enthusiasts rather than serious academics. Threads of suspicion. Holmes rose abruptly, his face bearing that expression of grim satisfaction indicating successful completion of a logical sequence. "Dr. Markham, we shall not detain you further at present. Pray send Inspector Lestrade a detailed account of your movements yesterday evening after leaving Professor Blackwood's residence." As we departed the hallowed precincts of Trinity College, Lestrade voiced the question uppermost in my own mind. "Well, Mr. Holmes?" Dr. Markham had motive, opportunity, and his distinctive knock was noted by the housekeeper. "Shall I have him brought in for questioning?" "Patience, Inspector," Holmes replied, his grey eyes distant with thought. "When evidence aligns too perfectly, it has often been carefully arranged. Dr. Markham may indeed be culpable, but of what crime remains to be determined." "You suspect someone else?" I suspect, Lestrade, that we are dealing with a mind of considerable cunning, one that would not hesitate to cast suspicion upon a convenient academic rival while pursuing a far more substantial prize. Holmes consulted his watch. A visit to Paternoster Row is in order. Publishers, I have found, maintain excellent records of their business dealings, and Serpent and Staff may prove most illuminating regarding the true value of Professor Blackwood's final work. As our hansom carried us back toward London through the gathering dusk, I reflected upon how rapidly our investigation had evolved from apparent suicide to complex murder, involving academic rivalry, valuable research, and now commercial publication. The professor's cipher seemed to beckon with renewed urgency, no longer merely a dying man's final message, but potentially the key to understanding why someone had been willing to kill for ancient knowledge. The game was indeed afoot, and I sensed that the threads of conspiracy we had begun to unravel would lead us into darker and more dangerous territory than the quiet world of scholarship might suggest. The journey from Cambridge back to London provided Holmes with ample opportunity to expound upon one of his favorite themes, the dangerous allure of the obvious suspect. As our hansom navigated the increasingly congested streets leading into the city proper, he fixed Inspector Lestrade with that penetrating stare which invariably preceded a lesson in criminal methodology. "Consider, Inspector, the case of Dr. Markham," Holmes began, his long fingers steepled before him. "Here we have a man of distinguished reputation who, openly disputed with our victim, visited him on the evening of his death and possesses both motive and opportunity. The evidence against him appears overwhelming, perhaps too overwhelming for a man of his evident intelligence." Lestrade shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "But surely, Mr. Holmes, when evidence points so clearly in one direction, it is precisely then that we must examine our assumptions most carefully," Holmes interrupted. "A genuine murderer seeks to avoid detection, not to advertise his presence with distinctive walking sticks and memorable confrontations. Dr. Markham's behavior suggests either remarkable stupidity or remarkable innocence, and I've observed nothing to suggest the former." The publishing house of Serpent and Staff, Paternoster Row, presented that curious mixture of scholarly dignity and commercial enterprise which characterized London's publishing district. The narrow street bustled with the traffic of the book trade, apprentices hurrying between establishments, with proofs and manuscripts, distinguished gentlemen examining the latest scholarly offerings in shop windows, and the ever-present aroma of printer's ink and binding glue that marked the transformation of thought into tangible form. The offices of Serpent and Staff occupied a respectable building whose modest frontage belied the apparent success of the enterprise within. The window display featured an impressive array of volumes dealing with ancient civilizations and Oriental studies, their quality binding suggesting a firm that understood the commercial value of scholarly respectability. We were received by Mr. Cornelius Pembroke, the senior partner, a gentleman whose appearance successfully balanced academic gravitas with commercial acumen. His office, lined with certificates from various archaeological societies, alongside testimonials from satisfied authors, spoke of a business that had built its reputation upon the intersection of scholarship and popular interest. "Gentlemen," Pembroke began, rising from behind a desk laden with correspondence, "I assume you are here regarding Professor Blackwood's tragic death, a devastating loss both personally and professionally. The professor's research represented potentially the most significant publication in our firm's history." Holmes accepted the offered chair while maintaining that alert attention, which marked the beginning of serious inquiry. "We understand Professor Blackwood had entered into contractual arrangements with your firm?" "Indeed. The professor approached us several months ago with his theories regarding advanced Babylonian knowledge, mathematical formulas, astronomical calculations, and engineering principles that would revolutionize our understanding of ancient civilization. The commercial potential was enormous, appealing not only to academic circles, but to the educated public's fascination with lost civilizations. The green wax revelation. Holmes produced the fragment of green wax seal recovered from Professor Blackwood's fireplace. The effect upon Pembroke was immediate and telling, a slight tightening around the eyes that spoke of recognition and concern. "Your corporate seal, I believe?" Holmes inquired with deceptive mildness. "It is indeed," Pembroke confirmed, accepting the fragment with evident reluctance. "We use this distinctive green wax for all confidential correspondence. The serpent and staff device has been our symbol for nearly 2 decades. And yet this fragment was found among burned papers at the scene of Professor Blackwood's death. What correspondence might have warranted such destruction?" Pembroke's composure showed the first signs of strain. We had been negotiating the final terms of our publishing agreement. The professor was exceedingly cautious about protecting his research. He insisted upon maintaining complete control over his source materials and demanded extensive verification procedures before publication. Verification procedures? Professor Blackwood spoke of conducting what he termed a final confirmation of his theories, something that would provide absolute proof of his claims. He was quite secretive about the nature of this verification, though he implied it would have significant implications for established academic institutions. Holmes had begun that characteristic examination of his surroundings which invariably preceded important deductions. His attention focused upon a small desk calendar where several appointments had been noted in a precise clerical hand. "Your firm employs editors who visit clients personally?" he inquired, indicating the calendar entries. "Certainly. For projects of particular significance, we find personal consultation invaluable. Mr. Mortlake, our senior editor for Oriental subjects, was scheduled to meet with Professor Blackwood yesterday evening to collect the final manuscript materials." Mr. Mortlake's account. The gentleman who presently entered was tall and spare, with the scholarly bearing of one long accustomed to dealing with ancient texts and difficult authors. His dark overcoat bore traces of the previous evening's fog, while his silver-headed walking stick spoke of professional success and personal refinement. "Mr. Elias Mortlake," Pembroke announced. "Perhaps you would be good enough to describe your visit to Professor Blackwood's residence." Mortlake's account was delivered with the precision of a man accustomed to accuracy in all matters. I arrived at the appointed hour of 9 o'clock and was admitted by the housekeeper. She took my card to announce my presence while I waited in the entrance hall. I could hear voices from the study, Professor Blackwood speaking with someone in what appeared to be an agitated discussion. "You recognized the other voice?" Holmes inquired sharply. I did not, though the tone suggested considerable disagreement. After several minutes, the housekeeper returned to inform me that the professor was indisposed and could not receive me. I departed at approximately 9:15, having accomplished nothing. Holmes examined Mortlake's walking stick with evident interest, noting its silver head and the distinctive wear patterns along its length. "You carry a signet ring, Mr. Mortlake?" The editor displayed a ring bearing the serpent and staff device. "All senior staff possess them for sealing confidential documents." "And your coat bears traces of lime efflorescence along the hem, consistent with contact with old stonework, perhaps a garden wall or gatepost. Also, I observe a faint smudge of tallow upon your right glove." Mortlake glanced down with apparent unconcern. "The fog was particularly dense last evening. I paused beneath a street lamp to consult my notes regarding the professor's requirements, and the dripping tallow fell upon my hand. As for the wall, Willoughby Lane is narrow, and one must sometimes brush close to the stonework to allow carriages to pass." The document analysis. Holmes turned his attention to the publishing firm's correspondence files, where Miss Frobisher, a capable young woman with ink-stained cuffs, produced the relevant documents with efficient precision. Among these was a letter of authorization bearing Professor Blackwood's signature, directing that his advance payment be transferred to Timothy Ashford. "Unusual," Holmes observed, examining the document with his magnifying glass. "You are not surprised by this arrangement?" Mr. Ashford had handled some of the professor's business affairs previously, Pembroke explained. The authorization appeared genuine, bearing the professor's seal and signature. Holmes held the paper to the light, then examined the blotting sand that had been used to dry the ink. With characteristic precision, he touched a grain to his finger and subjected it to the briefest examination. His expression grew thoughtful as he returned the document to its file. The professor's personal seal. You have seen it previously. On several occasions. A distinctive device featuring ancient cuneiform symbols, quite appropriate for a scholar of his specialization. The web of evidence. As we prepared to depart, Holmes summarized the evening's discoveries with that methodical precision which marked his approach to complex cases. We have established, Inspector, that Professor Blackwood was engaged in negotiations with Serpent and Staff, that confidential correspondence bearing their seal was burned in his fireplace, and that their representative visited his residence at the precise time when other evidence suggests the crime occurred. "Then Mortlake is our man?" Lestrade asked with evident satisfaction. Mr. Mortlake had opportunity, and his firm possessed significant financial motive, Holmes replied carefully. Yet observe how conveniently the evidence aligns. The distinctive walking stick, the tallow stain, the lime traces, even the precise timing of his visit. It is either the work of a remarkably careless criminal or a carefully constructed illusion designed to focus our attention in a particular direction. The pattern emerges. As our hansom carried us back toward Baker Street through the gathering dusk, Holmes outlined his growing understanding of the case's true complexity. Consider, Watson, how each suspect we encounter possesses both compelling motive and convenient opportunity. Dr. Markham wished to suppress research he considered fraudulent. Mr. Mortlake's firm stood to gain substantially from acquiring Professor Blackwood's work, yet in each case the evidence is almost theatrical in its obviousness. You suspect deliberate misdirection. I suspect, my dear fellow, that we are dealing with a mind of considerable cunning, one that understands both the value of Professor Blackwood's research and the necessity of deflecting suspicion from the true perpetrator. The cipher written in blood was not merely a dying man's final message, but a carefully planned communication designed to survive when all other evidence had been destroyed. And Timothy Ashford's role in this? Holmes's eyes gleamed with that particular intensity which marked the approach of revelation. Young Mr. Ashford's name appears with curious frequency in our investigation, as beneficiary of the professor's advance, as trusted assistant with access to all research materials, and as the one person who might reasonably be expected to understand the significance of ancient symbols. Tomorrow, Watson, we shall pay Mr. Ashford a most illuminating visit. The fog had begun to lift as we approached Baker Street, but I sensed that we were only beginning to penetrate the deeper mysteries surrounding Professor Blackwood's death. The Serpent's trail wound through academic rivalry, commercial ambition, and international intrigue, but at its heart lay a cipher that promised to reveal truths someone had been willing to kill to conceal. The morning broke with a crispness that seemed to sharpen the city's edges, and Holmes, invigorated by some private reasoning, declared that the day should begin with a visit to Mr. Timothy Ashford's lodgings near Downshire Hill. "A man's rooms, Watson, are the silent witnesses to his truth," he remarked as we hailed a cab from Baker Street. Ashford received us in a modest, orderly chamber, its few comforts redeemed by scholarly precision. On the table by the window lay sheets of ruled foolscap, a bottle of black ink, quills, and a small stack of cuneiform rubbings. Holmes's gaze, ever restless, took in the details: the bicycle stationed upon a cloth, the green wax among writing implements, and a red morocco notebook faintly stained with coffee. "My condolences on your loss, Mr. Ashford," Holmes began with grave courtesy. "We wish to clarify several points regarding your association with Professor Blackwood." Ashford's eyes, rimmed with fatigue, met Holmes's with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. "Ask what you will, sir. I would do anything to assist in finding the truth." Holmes began with the events of the fatal evening. "Your whereabouts last night, if you please." I left the professor at 8:15, sent to the stationer's for a particular watermark of foolscap. I returned after 9, but Mrs. Pemberton said he was not to be disturbed. I brought the parcels back here and began indexing his astronomical notes. You did not see him again? No, sir. Holmes's fingers, idly tracing the rim of the Morocco notebook, paused at a circular stain. Coffee, no sugar. The professor's rule? Ashford managed a wan smile. He said sugar attracts insects. It was a point of pride with him. Lestrade, who had accompanied us, interjected with characteristic directness. You were named as beneficiary of the publisher's advance. Why did the professor transfer funds to an assistant? Ashford's surprise seemed genuine. Beneficiary? Mr. Pembroke mentioned an advance, but the professor refused it. He said we mustn't bind ourselves until the final confirmation. As to any transfer, I know nothing of it. Holmes lifted a stick of green wax. Dealings with serpent and staff? I returned a packet for correction, as Mr. Mortlake asked. He gave me the wax, said we ought to seal anything leaving the house. Holmes's attention shifted to a stray indigo fiber on the windowsill, which he deftly secreted away for later analysis. He questioned Ashford on the last days with the professor. He spoke of a last confirmation, Holmes said. What did he mean? Ashford hesitated. He believed the tablets didn't just describe a lost archive. They indicated its location through a cipher, mathematical rather than philological. He said that if he were prevented from publishing, the signs would lead others to the truth. He seemed in high spirits then, but the past day he was strained. There were threatening letters. He laughed at them by day, but at night he paced and tended the fire at odd hours. And visitors? Dr. Markham, last night at 9. There was an argument, though I heard no words. And a week ago, a man of foreign aspect, with a limp and a scarf up to his chin. He looked at the professor's books with a greedy eye. Holmes's silence was deep. His gaze lingered on Ashford for a long moment before he thanked him and led us out. A return to Willoughby Lane. At Holmes's insistence, we revisited Blackwood's study. The great detective's scrutiny now fell not on the obvious, but on the periphery. The skirting beneath the window, the fringe of the hearth rug, the door's threshold. At the keyhole, he paused, using his glass to inspect the bit, then examined the mantel and a porcelain tray, sniffing it delicately before returning it to its place. Lestrade, growing impatient, pressed his case. Mortlake's visit, the green wax, the transfer of funds. Surely we are within arm's length of our man. Holmes's expression was inscrutable. We are within arm's length of something, Inspector. Whether it is a man or a shadow, I do not yet pronounce. There is a small inconsistency which, if I am not mistaken, will widen into a chasm. I voiced my own doubt. The facts align too neatly against Mortlake and Ashford. It seems almost staged. Almost, Holmes replied. The obvious path is often the one most carefully laid by the cunning adversary. The quiet before the storm. We returned to Baker Street, where Holmes closeted himself with the professor's cipher, reference books, and chemical apparatus. Only the low mutterings of his violin marked the passage of hours. Near midnight, I heard him give a soft, satisfied laugh, the sound of a new piece falling into place. He emerged at last, eyes bright with anticipation. Watson, tomorrow we shall contrive a modest demonstration, no more than a twitch upon a certain line. If the fish we seek is in this water, he will show his fin. Understanding that Holmes's secrets bloom best at their appointed hour, I pressed him no further. Yet I retired with the conviction that, though Lestrade believed the case nearly closed, the true heart of the mystery lay yet concealed, and that my friend held in his hand the thread which, once tugged, would set the whole tangled skein unraveling. The grey November dawn found Holmes in his dressing gown, surrounded by reference works on ancient scripts and chemical apparatus, The professor's blood-written cipher spread before him like a sacred text awaiting revelation. His restless energy from the previous evening had crystallized into methodical analysis, and I observed him conducting a series of delicate experiments with samples collected during our investigation. "Watson," he announced, without lifting his eyes from his work, "observe the composition of this blood sample. The professor's final message contains traces of iron oxide and gum arabic, not the natural components of human blood, but materials consistent with ancient ink preparation. This cipher was composed with deliberate care, using writing materials the professor had prepared in advance." He moved to his magnifying glass, examining the symbols with renewed intensity. "Furthermore, this serpent wound about a staff. It appears at both beginning and end of the message. In Mesopotamian iconography, this represents Ningish Zida, patron of scribes and keeper of written knowledge." Professor Blackwood was declaring the authenticity of his final communication. Holmes rose and moved to his desk, where he began composing what appeared to be several brief advertisements. "The obvious suspects continue to present themselves with theatrical convenience, Watson. Dr. Markham with his distinctive walking stick, Mr. Mortlake with his precise timing, even young Ashford with his access to materials. Yet when evidence aligns too perfectly, it has often been carefully arranged. The trap is set. Mrs. Hudson's entrance with the Morning Post was accompanied by an observation that proved more illuminating than any official correspondence. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Holmes, but there's been a gentleman watching the house since dawn. Foreign-looking fellow with a pronounced limp standing across the way by the lamp-post." Holmes moved swiftly to the window, his sharp eyes scanning the street below. "The same individual Ashford mentioned visiting Professor Blackwood," I observed, recognizing the description. "Indeed, Watson, our investigation has attracted attention from the true architect of this conspiracy." Holmes returned to his advertisements with renewed purpose. "Mrs. Hudson, should this gentleman approach, admit him with your usual courtesy, but send Billy immediately to inform Inspector Lestrade." He completed 3 carefully worded notices for the agony columns. One, announcing that confirmation had been achieved, another referencing obscure astronomical calculations, and a third indicating that a red Morocco notebook, property of A.B., has been secured by friends and will be conveyed to safe custody this evening. Violence strikes again. Our morning's preparations were interrupted by Inspector Lestrade's urgent arrival, his face bearing that grim expression which indicated fresh developments in our case. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, we have another incident. Mr. Timothy Ashford has been attacked in his lodgings. The young man is shaken but unharmed, though his rooms were thoroughly ransacked. My medical instincts immediately engaged. The nature of the attack: a blow from behind while he investigated a noise at his window. When he regained consciousness, his papers were scattered and a small notebook was missing, the red Morocco volume you observed during our previous visit." Holmes had begun that characteristic pacing which marked periods of intense mental activity. The missing notebook contained Ashford's personal observations on the professor's work, including his attempts to decipher the astronomical references. Our adversary has moved from eliminating witnesses to securing the keys to Professor Blackwood's final secret. The physical evidence. At Ashford's lodgings, Holmes's examination revealed crucial details that connected our mysterious foreign observer to the crime. Kneeling beside the forced window, he applied a chemical solution to faint scratches on the wooden frame, revealing metallic traces. "Lead, Watson," he announced with satisfaction, "consistent with a lead-weighted walking stick striking the frame during forced entry. Combined with these distinctive boot prints, note the uneven impression suggesting a pronounced limp, we have physical confirmation of our suspect's identity." Holmes examined the muddy footprints with his magnifying glass, sketching their pattern in his notebook. The same individual who visited Professor Blackwood, who has been observing our Baker Street residence and who now possesses young Ashford's research notes. The net is drawing tight around someone who understands both the value of the professor's discovery and the necessity of controlling its revelation. The international dimension. As we prepared to leave Ashford under police protection, Holmes outlined his growing understanding of the case's true complexity. This extends far beyond academic rivalry or commercial ambition, Watson. Professor Blackwood's research has attracted attention from parties willing to employ violence to achieve their ends. Foreign agents? I inquired, recalling the mysterious visitor's continental appearance. Someone with resources, training, and a deep understanding of the significance of ancient Mesopotamian knowledge. The systematic elimination of everyone connected with the professor's work suggests an organization rather than an individual actor. Holmes consulted his watch with that decisive energy which marked the transition from investigation to action. Inspector, I require immediate surveillance of the Serpent and staff offices and protection for all individuals connected with this case. Our advertisements will appear in this evening's papers, and I expect they will draw our quarry into the open. The approaching climax. You have a plan? Lestrade asked, though his tone suggested he already knew Holmes would reveal only what was necessary. I have bait, Inspector, carefully crafted to appeal to someone who believes he has eliminated all obstacles to possessing Professor Blackwood's secret. Tonight, we shall discover whether the serpent or the staff proves more powerful, ancient wisdom or modern avarice. As we returned to Baker Street through the gathering fog, I reflected upon how rapidly our investigation had evolved from scholarly murder to international conspiracy. The professor's cipher, written in blood as his final act, had become not merely evidence of crime, but the key to preventing further violence. The foreign gentleman's continued surveillance of our residence suggested that we ourselves had become players in a dangerous game whose rules and stakes we were only beginning to understand. Holmes's trap was set, but I could not shake the feeling that we were about to confront an adversary whose resources and ruthlessness far exceeded anything we had previously encountered in the quiet world of academic London. The game was indeed afoot, and the next move would determine whether Professor Blackwood's final secret would be revealed or buried forever with its discoverer. The November fog had begun to lift as evening settled upon Baker Street, though the chill seemed to penetrate the very marrow of London's ancient stones. Holmes spent the afternoon in that peculiar combination of intense preparation and apparent leisure which I had learned to associate with the approach of critical moments in his most complex cases. His movements possessed the calculated precision of a chess master arranging pieces for an inevitable checkmate. "Watson," he announced, setting aside his chemical apparatus with evident satisfaction, "our advertisements have achieved their intended effect. Observe Mrs. Hudson's report of 3 separate inquiries regarding our whereabouts, each from gentlemen of distinctly foreign aspect. The serpent has tasted our bait and found it to his liking." He moved to his desk, where he had prepared several items that seemed incongruous with the scholarly nature of our investigation. A dark lantern, theatrical makeup, and what appeared to be a red Morocco notebook identical to the one stolen from young Ashford's lodgings. "The evening will require a performance, my dear fellow, one calculated to draw our adversary into the open while ensuring his capture." Holmes outlined his strategy with characteristic thoroughness. The advertisements had served their purpose, suggesting that Professor Blackwood's research materials were being consolidated and prepared for official examination. Our mysterious foreign agent, having failed to secure Ashford's notebook, would be compelled to act before the information could be fully analyzed and disseminated. The dual deception. "You will serve as our primary decoy, Watson," Holmes explained, producing a carefully wrapped package containing the duplicate notebook. "A simple journey to the British Museum, ostensibly to deposit materials in their secure manuscript collection. Our adversary will assume this represents his final opportunity to acquire the professor's secrets. Meanwhile, Holmes himself would maintain surveillance of Professor Blackwood's residence, where he suspected a second attempt might be made to search for additional materials. The criminal mind when pressed, often returns to the scene of its original success. Our foreign friend may believe that his hasty departure on the night of the murder left valuable evidence behind. As darkness deepened, Holmes transformed himself with the artistry that never failed to astound me. Within minutes, the consulting detective had become a stooped commissionaire, his sharp features obscured by theatrical whiskers and spectacles, his distinctive silhouette disguised beneath a shabby ulster coat. The museum gambit. My journey through the fog-shrouded streets possessed all the tension of a military reconnaissance. The hansom's wheels echoed hollowly on the cobblestones as we navigated the increasingly deserted thoroughfares leading toward Bloomsbury. Through the rear window, I observed the discreet presence of a second vehicle maintaining careful distance. Our adversary had indeed taken the bait. The British Museum's imposing facade loomed through the mist like a temple to ancient knowledge, its classical columns suggesting permanence and security. My special pass, arranged through Holmes's extensive network of contacts, provided access to the manuscript reading room despite the late hour. The vast chamber, illuminated only by scattered gas jets, possessed an almost sepulchral atmosphere. Following Holmes's precise instructions, I placed the wrapped package on a designated table beneath the stern gaze of classical busts, then withdrew to observe from the shadows of the periodical section. The foreign agent's entrance was marked by professional caution rather than haste. He moved with the economical grace of one trained in clandestine operations, his pronounced limp barely affecting his fluid progress through the maze of reading tables. His examination of the package was swift but thorough, employing what appeared to be specialized tools to verify its contents without disturbing the wrapping. The confrontation. When I emerged from the museum's entrance, the fog had thickened to an almost impenetrable wall, transforming familiar London into an alien landscape of shadows and muffled sounds. The foreign agent materialized from this grey void with startling suddenness, his approach so silent that I became aware of his presence only when his accented voice cut through the silence. "The notebook, mein Herr," he said quietly, his words carrying the authority of one accustomed to obedience. "You will hand it over without difficulty, and you will not be harmed." His appearance, revealed clearly for the first time, confirmed many of Holmes's deductions. The man was tall and spare, with the bearing of military training, his dark overcoat of continental cut. Most significantly, he carried a lead-weighted walking stick whose distinctive markings matched the evidence Holmes had discovered at Ashford's lodgings. My medical training had prepared me for many crises, but I was fundamentally a man of healing rather than conflict. Nevertheless, I clutched the package firmly, drawing upon reserves of courage I had not known I possessed. "This contains nothing that would interest you," I replied with more steadiness than I felt. His response was immediate and professional. The weighted stick rose with practiced efficiency, aimed not to kill, but to incapacitate. Only the shrill blast of police whistles, echoing through the fog from multiple directions, prevented the blow from landing. Inspector Lestrade's men emerged from the mist with military precision, their coordinated approach speaking of careful planning. Yet our adversary possessed resources equal to the challenge. With remarkable agility, despite his infirmity, he vaulted over the museum's iron railings and vanished into the labyrinthine streets of Bloomsbury, leaving only the echo of his irregular footsteps fading into the fog. The Willoughby Lane revelation. Meanwhile, Holmes's vigil at Professor Blackwood's residence had yielded results of even greater significance. His subsequent account, delivered with the precision of a military report, revealed the true sophistication of our adversary's methods. At precisely 9 o'clock, always that significant hour, 3 measured taps had sounded upon the stone step outside the professor's study. The door's manipulation demonstrated technical expertise of the highest order, a combination of tallow composition and silk thread that allowed the key to be turned from outside the locked room, creating the perfect illusion of suicide. The technique is known in certain European circles. Holmes explained, displaying the recovered thread with evident satisfaction. Indigo silk of exceptional fineness, treated with a tallow compound that leaves no residue. Our adversary possesses training that extends far beyond common criminality. More significantly, Holmes had observed the intruder's face clearly enough to provide detailed description. A gentleman of middle years, clean-shaven with the bearing of professional competence. Most importantly, Watson, he wore a signet ring bearing a distinctive device, the serpent and staff symbol we have encountered throughout this investigation. The international dimension. The evening's events had confirmed Holmes's growing understanding of the case's true complexity. Professor Blackwood's murder was not the work of academic rivals or commercial competitors, but of an international organization with resources and methods that suggested state sponsorship. The systematic elimination of witnesses, the professional techniques employed, and the evident value placed upon the professor's research all point to interests far beyond individual gain, Holmes observed, settling into his chair with evident satisfaction despite the evening's dangers. Inspector Lestrade's subsequent investigation of the captured materials revealed additional confirmation. Among the foreign agent's possessions were documents bearing official seals from multiple European governments, suggesting a network of considerable scope and influence. The cipher's true significance. Most importantly, the evening's confrontation had provided crucial insights into Professor Blackwood's final message. The foreign agent's desperate pursuit of Ashford's notebook, combined with his systematic search of the professor's residence, confirmed that the blood-written cipher contained information of extraordinary value. The symbols are not merely academic curiosities, Watson, Holmes explained, studying the reproduced cipher with renewed intensity. They represent coordinates, not of buried treasure in the romantic sense, but of knowledge that could revolutionize modern understanding of ancient civilizations. The strategic implications are obvious. The professor's final act had been one of supreme courage and foresight. Knowing that his death was imminent, he had encoded the location of his greatest discovery in symbols that would survive when all other evidence had been destroyed. The cipher was not a confession or a cry for help, but a deliberate communication designed to ensure that his life's work would not die with him. The net closes. As dawn approached over Baker Street, Holmes outlined the next phase of his strategy. The foreign agent's escape had been temporary rather than definitive. His desperation suggested that time was running short for whatever organization he represented. The serpent has shown its head, Watson, but the body remains concealed. Tomorrow we shall take steps to ensure that both are brought into the light. His gray eyes held that particular intensity which marked the approach of a case's resolution. Professor Blackwood's cipher will be decoded, his murderer will be brought to justice, and the ancient knowledge he died to protect will find its way to appropriate hands. The game was indeed reaching its climax, and I sensed that the final confrontation would test not only Holmes's deductive abilities, but our very survival. The quiet world of scholarship had been shattered by international intrigue, and only my friend's remarkable intellect stood between civilization and those who would exploit ancient wisdom for modern conquest. The serpent had struck, but it had not yet delivered its fatal blow. That final, decisive encounter lay ahead, waiting in the shadows of London's fog-shrouded streets. The pale November morning found our Baker Street quarters transformed into what resembled a military command post. Holmes, immaculately dressed and radiating the controlled energy of a master strategist approaching victory, had arranged the evidence of our investigation with mathematical precision across every available surface. The professor's blood-written cipher occupied the place of honor upon the mantelpiece, while beneath it lay arranged the various clues that had led us through this labyrinthine case. Fragments of green wax, samples of indigo thread, chemical analyses, and detailed sketches of boot prints and walking stick impressions. Inspector Lestrade sat rigidly in his customary chair, his weathered features bearing that expression of professional skepticism which invariably preceded Holmes's more dramatic revelations. Young Timothy Ashford, pale but resolute, clutched his recovered red Morocco notebook as if it were a lifeline, while I observed the scene with the dual perspective of chronicler and participant, sensing that we stood upon the threshold of truth. "Gentlemen," Holmes began, his voice carrying that particular authority which marked his finest moments, "we have before us a case that began as apparent suicide, evolved into suspected murder, and has revealed itself as something far more sophisticated, a carefully orchestrated conspiracy designed to acquire knowledge of incalculable value while eliminating all witnesses to its theft." He moved to the fireplace, his gray eyes reflecting the flames as he continued. "From the beginning, we have been presented with a surfeit of suspects, each possessing compelling motive and convenient opportunity. This abundance of evidence should have been our first warning that we were dealing with a mind of exceptional cunning, one that understood the investigative process well enough to manipulate it. Dismantling the deceptions." Holmes turned to address each suspect systematically, his analysis cutting through the carefully constructed illusions like a surgeon's blade through diseased tissue. "Consider first Dr. Lionel Markham of Cambridge," he said, producing the scholar's calling card. His heated correspondence with Professor Blackwood, his visit at the fatal hour, his distinctive walking stick, all seemed to point toward academic rivalry turned murderous. Yet observe the deeper pattern. Dr. Markham's dispute was genuine scholarly disagreement, conducted through proper channels and witnessed by colleagues. His 3 precise raps were not signals of conspiracy, but merely his habitual method of announcing himself as confirmed by his Cambridge porter. Lestrade shifted uncomfortably. "But the evidence seemed so clear, Mr. Holmes." "Precisely because it was. Designed to appear so, Inspector. Dr. Markham was the perfect red herring, a man with genuine motive whose presence could be easily documented and whose academic pride made him naturally defensive under questioning." Holmes moved to his chemical apparatus, where he had prepared a demonstration that would prove crucial to his revelation. "Next, consider Mr. Elias Mortlake of Serpent and Staff, his firm's green wax seal found among the burned papers, his visit at the crucial hour, the tallow stains upon his glove. Again, evidence that aligned too conveniently. The burned papers were not publishing contracts but Professor Blackwood's preliminary notes, discarded after his breakthrough. The green wax was easily obtained and planted, while the tallow stain resulted from his perfectly innocent pause beneath a street lamp. "Then who?" Ashford interjected, his voice trembling with exhaustion and confusion. "The locked room mystery solved." Holmes smiled with grim satisfaction as he produced a length of indigo silk thread, treating it with a compound from his chemical stores. "The locked room presented our most intriguing technical challenge, gentlemen. How does one create the perfect illusion of suicide while ensuring the victim cannot reveal the truth?" He demonstrated with practiced precision, showing how the treated thread could manipulate a key from outside a locked door. Tallow mixed with a specific alpine mineral compound, available only to those with continental connections, provides the necessary lubrication. The thread, of distinctive indigo silk, leaves virtually no trace once removed. The key falls to the floor inside the room, creating the perfect suicide scenario. The demonstration was both elegant and chilling in its simplicity. This technique is known in certain European circles, requiring professional training and specialized materials. Our murderer possessed both, along with the detailed knowledge of Professor Blackwood's habits necessary to execute the plan flawlessly. The cipher's true purpose. Holmes returned to the blood-written cipher, his analysis combining scholarly insight with practical deduction. Professor Blackwood's final message was not the random scratching of a dying man, but a carefully constructed communication designed to survive when all other evidence had been destroyed. The symbols combine Mesopotamian iconography with mathematical principles, creating coordinates that would lead to his greatest discovery. Not merely ancient tablets, but a hidden archive containing engineering and astronomical knowledge that could revolutionize modern science. He pointed to specific elements within the cipher. This serpent wound about a staff appears at beginning and end, the symbol of Ningish Zida, patron of scribes and keeper of written knowledge. Professor Blackwood was declaring the authenticity of his message while providing the key to unlock secrets worth killing for. The true mastermind, revealed Holmes, paused in his pacing, his penetrating gaze settling upon each of us in turn before he delivered his devastating conclusion. The man who orchestrated Professor Blackwood's murder, who manipulated our investigation through carefully planted evidence, who possessed both the means and the motive to commit this elaborate crime, is none other than Mr. Cornelius Pembroke, senior partner of Serpent and Staff Oriental and Scientific Imprints. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the crackling of the fire and Lestrade's sharp intake of breath. Pembroke recognized the immense commercial and strategic value of the professor's research. Holmes continued relentlessly. More than that, he understood that Professor Blackwood's independent spirit and scholarly integrity would prevent the exclusive exploitation of such knowledge. The professor intended to publish his discoveries for the benefit of all humanity. Pembroke saw an opportunity for personal profit and international influence. Holmes produced the fragment of green wax bearing the serpent and staff device. This was not evidence pointing toward Mr. Mortlake, but toward Pembroke himself. He deliberately pressed his own signet ring into the wax, knowing we would assume it implicated his employee rather than himself. The indigo fiber found on the professor's desk matches the lining of a custom cloak Pembroke commissioned from Savile Row, a garment he wore during his nocturnal return to complete the staged suicide. The method exposed. Pembroke's plan was elegant in its complexity, Holmes explained, his admiration for the criminal mind evident despite his moral condemnation. He arranged for both Dr. Markham and Mr. Mortlake to visit Professor Blackwood on the fatal evening, providing perfect cover for his own presence. After both legitimate visitors had departed, he returned using his detailed knowledge of the professor's habits and the house's layout. Holmes demonstrated the sequence of events with methodical precision. The professor, already suspicious due to threatening letters, admitted Pembroke reluctantly. The confrontation was brief but decisive. Pembroke possessed both the physical advantage and the element of surprise. The locked room technique created the perfect suicide scenario, while the planted evidence ensured that suspicion would fall upon convenient scapegoats. The international dimension. Pembroke's connections extend far beyond legitimate publishing, gentlemen. His foreign agent with the pronounced limp is merely one operative in a network designed to acquire and monetize ancient knowledge for the highest bidder. The systematic theft of research materials, the professional techniques employed, and the sophisticated misdirection all point to an organization with resources that transcend individual criminal enterprise. Holmes moved to the window, gazing out at the fog-shrouded street where danger still lurked. Professor Blackwood's murder was not an isolated crime, but part of a larger conspiracy to control knowledge that could shift the balance of international power. His cipher represents not merely the location of ancient tablets, but the key to discoveries that could revolutionize modern engineering, navigation, and warfare. The final confrontation. Even now, Holmes announced, consulting his watch with dramatic precision, Pembroke believes himself secure in his deception. He has manipulated our investigation, eliminated witnesses, and acquired the materials necessary to complete his theft of the professor's legacy. But he has made one crucial error. He has underestimated both the professor's final gambit and our ability to decode it. Holmes moved to his desk, revealing a series of carefully prepared documents. The advertisements I placed in yesterday's evening papers have served their purpose, gentlemen. Mr. Pembroke believes that the professor's research materials are being consolidated for official examination, threatening his exclusive access to their secrets. He will be compelled to act, and when he does, we shall be ready. The trap was set with characteristic Holmes precision, a combination of psychological manipulation and physical evidence that would force the true criminal into revealing himself. Inspector Lestrade's men were already in position, while Holmes himself had prepared the final elements of a confrontation that would determine whether Professor Blackwood's sacrifice would be vindicated or whether his murderer would escape to profit from ancient wisdom. The stakes revealed. As we prepared for what promised to be a dangerous evening, Holmes outlined the true significance of our mission. We face not merely a clever murderer, gentlemen, but a conspiracy that threatens to pervert the noblest human achievement, the pursuit of knowledge, into an instrument of exploitation and conquest. Professor Blackwood died defending the principle that wisdom belongs to all humanity, not to those ruthless enough to steal it. The fog was beginning to rise from the Thames as Holmes made his final preparations, his disguise transforming him from consulting detective to common tradesman. The game had indeed reached its climax, and I sensed that the next few hours would determine not only the fate of Professor Blackwood's murderer, but the destiny of knowledge that could reshape the modern world. The serpent had shown its true face at last, but Holmes had prepared a trap worthy of his most dangerous adversary. Ancient wisdom and modern justice would clash in the fog-shrouded streets of London, with civilization itself hanging in the balance. The November fog had thickened to an almost impenetrable wall by the time Holmes completed his preparations for what he termed the final movement of our scholarly symphony. Our Baker Street quarters had been transformed into a command centre worthy of a military campaign, with maps of London marked in red ink, telegrams arranged in precise chronological order, and the professor's blood-written cipher positioned where the gaslight would illuminate every carefully drawn symbol. "Watson," Holmes announced, adjusting the collar of a workman's coat that would serve as his disguise. "Tonight we shall witness the convergence of three separate threads: academic ambition, international conspiracy, and simple human greed. Our adversary believes himself secure in his deception, but he has made the fundamental error of underestimating both Professor Blackwood's final gambit and our ability to decode it." Inspector Lestrade, who had arrived with a complement of his most trusted men, reviewed the evening's strategy with characteristic thoroughness. "The surveillance positions are established, Mr. Holmes. 2 men at Serpent and Staff, 4 near Pembroke's residence in Russell Square, and additional units positioned along the likely escape routes." Holmes consulted his watch with that precise attention to timing which marked all his most complex operations. "Pembroke will move tonight, Inspector. Our advertisements have created the illusion that Professor Blackwood's research materials are being consolidated for official examination, threatening his exclusive access to their secrets. Desperation will compel him to act, and when he does, we shall be ready." The web tightens. The fog-shrouded streets of Russell Square presented an almost theatrical backdrop for the evening's drama. Holmes, transformed by his artistry into a common street sweeper, had positioned himself where he could observe both Pembroke's residence and the approaches from Paternoster Row. I maintained my station in the shadow of a plane tree, while Lestrade's men occupied strategic positions throughout the square. At precisely 10:30, a hansom cab materialized from the fog, its wheels muffled on the wet cobblestones. From it emerged not Pembroke, but the foreign agent whose escape from the British Museum had proved temporary rather than final. His pronounced limp was unmistakable even in the dim gaslight, and he carried himself with the professional caution of one who understood the dangers of his position. Rather than approaching Pembroke's residence directly, the agent took up a position of observation, his attention focused upon the house with an intensity that spoke of urgent purpose. Holmes's subsequent account revealed the significance of this development. Our adversary was not acting alone, but as part of a coordinated effort that extended far beyond individual criminal enterprise. The publisher's gambit. Pembroke's emergence from his residence at 11 o'clock demonstrated the punctuality of a man driven by desperation rather than confidence. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain, his customary air of scholarly dignity replaced by the furtive movements of a cornered criminal. He carried a leather dispatch case that undoubtedly contained the fruits of his murderous conspiracy. The meeting between Pembroke and his foreign confederate unfolded with the precision of a well-rehearsed performance. Their exchange, though conducted in hushed tones, carried clearly through the fog-muffled silence of the square. Holmes, positioned where every word could be distinctly heard, later provided the crucial details of their conversation. "The situation has become untenable," Pembroke declared without preamble. "Holmes's investigation has proceeded far beyond our initial calculations. We must complete the transaction tonight and depart London immediately." The foreign agent's accented reply revealed both the international scope of the conspiracy and the pressure under which they operated. "The Berlin contacts are growing impatient, Herr Pembroke. They invested substantial resources based on your assurances that the archive's location could be determined precisely. Professor Blackwood's cipher has proved more sophisticated than anticipated," Pembroke admitted, his voice carrying the frustration of a man whose careful plans had encountered unexpected obstacles. "But we have sufficient information to proceed. The astronomical calculations, combined with the geographical references, provide coordinates accurate enough for our purposes." Holmes's masterstroke. It was at this crucial moment that Holmes chose to reveal himself, emerging from the fog with that theatrical precision which marked his most dramatic confrontations. His appearance transformed the quiet square into a trap, while the simultaneous movement of Inspector Lestrade's men blocked all possible escape routes. "Gentlemen," Holmes announced, his voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute certainty, "your conversation has provided the final confirmation of Professor Blackwood's murder and the conspiracy that motivated it. Mr. Pembroke, you stand accused not merely of murder, but of betraying the fundamental principles of scholarly inquiry for personal gain." The foreign agent's response was immediate and professional. His lead-weighted walking stick rose with practiced efficiency, but Holmes had anticipated such a reaction. With movements that spoke of his own physical training, he sidestepped the blow while simultaneously producing a set of manacles that clicked shut around the agent's wrists with satisfying finality. Pembroke's reaction proved more illuminating than any confession. Rather than attempting denial or escape, he faced Holmes with the arrogance that had driven his criminal enterprise from its inception. "Mr. Holmes, your reputation for dramatic revelation is well deserved, but your understanding of the larger implications remains sadly limited. Professor Blackwood's research represents knowledge that could shift the balance of international power. Should such discoveries remain locked in academic institutions when they could serve practical purposes?" The physical evidence. Holmes's response combined moral condemnation with irrefutable physical proof. From his coat, he produced the crucial evidence that would ensure conviction: the indigo silk thread treated with alpine tallow compound, photographic reproductions of distinctive boot prints, and most damning of all, a perfect impression of Pembroke's signet ring in green wax. "Your technical skill was admirable, Mr. Pembroke, but your arrogance proved fatal. This signet impression, recovered from Professor Blackwood's study, matches your ring exactly. The indigo fibers found on the professor's desk correspond to the lining of your custom cloak. The tallow compound used to manipulate the locked door contains mineral traces found only in specific alpine regions where your publishing firm maintains business connections." Holmes moved to his most devastating revelation. "Most significantly, the timing of your movements on the fatal evening has been precisely established. You visited Professor Blackwood not once, but twice. first openly as Dr. Markham departed, then secretly after Mr. Mortlake's unsuccessful appointment. The second visit, conducted through the garden entrance, provided the opportunity for murder while ensuring that suspicion would fall upon more obvious suspects. The cipher's secret. With Pembroke and his confederate secure in Inspector Lestrade's custody, Holmes turned his attention to the leather dispatch case that had fallen during the arrest. Its contents confirmed his deductions about the true significance of Professor Blackwood's research. Detailed maps marked with astronomical coordinates, translations of ancient Mesopotamian texts, and most importantly, a partial decipherment of the blood-written cipher. Professor Blackwood's final message was indeed his masterpiece, Holmes explained, holding the cipher to the gaslight. The symbols combine Mesopotamian iconography with mathematical principles, creating coordinates that would lead to a hidden archive containing engineering and astronomical knowledge centuries ahead of its time. The strategic implications are obvious. Such discoveries could revolutionize modern navigation, engineering, and military science. Holmes pointed to specific elements within the cipher. This serpent wound about a staff appears at both beginning and end. The symbol of Ningishzida, patron of scribes and keeper of written knowledge. Professor Blackwood was declaring the authenticity of his message while providing the key to unlock secrets worth killing for. The mathematical progression here indicates longitude, while these astronomical referents provide precise latitude coordinates. The international dimension. The foreign agent, now identified through documents found in his possession as Herr Karl Richter, represented interests that extended far beyond individual criminal enterprise. His credentials revealed connections to a shadowy consortium with resources that suggested state sponsorship, confirming Holmes's growing understanding of the case's true complexity. This conspiracy extends throughout European academic circles, Holmes observed, examining the seized correspondence. Pembroke was merely one operative in a network designed to acquire and monetize ancient knowledge for strategic advantage. The systematic theft of research materials, the professional techniques employed, and the sophisticated misdirection all point to an organization with resources that transcend common criminality. Justice and resolution. As dawn broke over London's fog-shrouded streets, the true scope of our victory became apparent. Professor Blackwood's murderer would face justice, his research would be preserved for legitimate scholarly examination, and the international conspiracy that had threatened to corrupt the fundamental principles of academic inquiry had been exposed and defeated. Yet Holmes's final reflection carried a note of soberness that tempered our triumph. Professor Blackwood's sacrifice was not in vain, Watson, but neither was it unique. The pursuit of knowledge, when corrupted by avarice and the lust for power, becomes a destructive force that threatens the very foundations of human understanding. We have won this battle, but the war between wisdom and exploitation continues. Watson's contemplation. As we returned to Baker Street through the lifting fog, I reflected upon the extraordinary complexity of the case we had just concluded. Holmes had not merely solved a murder, he had unraveled an international conspiracy, exposed a network of academic corruption, and preserved knowledge that belonged to all humanity rather than those ruthless enough to steal it. The professor's cipher, written in blood as his final act, had indeed proved to be his masterpiece. Not merely evidence of crime, but a testament to the enduring power of truth over deception, justice over greed, and the noble pursuit of knowledge over its corrupt exploitation. The serpent had been unmasked, its poison neutralized by the antidote of justice and human decency. Yet I sensed that this victory, significant as it was, represented only one battle in a larger conflict between those who would hoard knowledge for personal advantage and those who believed in the free exchange of human understanding. The game was won, but the greater contest would continue as long as human nature remained capable of both noble pursuit and base corruption. Professor Armitage Blackwood's final cipher had finally been read, and its message would echo through the halls of legitimate scholarship for generations to come. The November dawn broke with that peculiar clarity which sometimes follows London's densest fogs, as if the very air had been purified by the night's revelations. Our Baker Street quarters, so recently transformed into a command centre for the pursuit of justice, now bore witness to the quiet satisfaction that accompanies the successful conclusion of a most complex affair. Holmes sat before the fireplace, the professor's blood-written cipher spread upon a small table beside him, while the complete solution to that tragic puzzle took final shape beneath his methodical analysis. Inspector Lestrade, whose practical understanding had finally encompassed the full scope of our investigation, reviewed the prisoner's confessions with evident relief. The scope of this conspiracy staggers the imagination, Mr. Holmes. Pembroke's network extends through half the publishing houses of Europe, each serving as a conduit for the acquisition and distribution of sensitive materials. Holmes looked up from his work, his grey eyes reflecting both satisfaction and soberness. The conspiracy represents something far more dangerous than common criminality, Inspector. Professor Blackwood's research contained knowledge that could have shifted the balance of international power. Engineering principles, astronomical calculations, and mathematical concepts that would have provided significant military advantages to whichever nation controlled them. The cipher's ultimate secret. With Pembroke's partial translations serving as confirmation rather than revelation, Holmes had finally penetrated the professor's masterpiece of scholarly communication. The symbols, far from representing the desperate scratches of a dying man, revealed themselves as a sophisticated message combining ancient wisdom with modern precision. "Observe, Watson," Holmes said, indicating the serpent and staff device that bracketed the cipher. Ningishzida's symbol serves multiple purposes: authentication, instruction, and, most significantly, accusation. Professor Blackwood was not merely providing coordinates to his great discovery. He was identifying his murderer through a method so subtle that only the guilty party would recognize its significance. Holmes produced his magnifying glass, directing my attention to the final symbol in the sequence. This serpent wound about a staff appears identical to the others, but note the subtle inversion. The creature's head faces downward rather than upward. The staff leans leftward rather than right. It matches, stroke for stroke, not the public device of Serpent and Staff Publishing, but Pembroke's private signet ring, which differs fractionally from his firm's official seal. The revelation struck me with the force of absolute truth. The professor, dying, could not write Pembroke in conventional letters, but he could reproduce the very symbol that would condemn his murderer, knowing that only someone intimately familiar with that private device would recognize its significance. Precisely, Watson. It was Professor Blackwood's final gambit, a message that would survive when all other evidence had been destroyed, yet remain meaningless to casual observers, while providing irrefutable identification to those with the knowledge to decode it. The restoration of justice. The days that followed our nocturnal drama in Russell Square unfolded with that curious swiftness which often followed. Great mental exertion. The evidence Holmes had assembled, the indigo fibers from Pembroke's custom cloak, the alpine tallow compound, the manipulated lock mechanism, and most damning of all, the perfect correspondence between the inverted cipher symbol and Pembroke's private signet formed a chain of proof that admitted no convenient compromise. Pembroke himself faced the magistrate with a composure I could not but find chilling, though I confess I grudgingly admired his refusal to seek mercy through false contrition. His counsel, retained from among London's most distinguished barristers, could do little against the methodical precision of Holmes's case. The publisher's international network, exposed through seized correspondence and Herr Richter's reluctant cooperation, revealed a conspiracy that extended far beyond individual avarice into the realm of state-sponsored acquisition of strategic knowledge. Young Timothy Ashford, whose courage during our investigation had nearly cost him his life, found his ordeal transformed into opportunity. The British Museum, recognizing both the peril he had braved and the meticulous notes he had preserved, offered him a position that would allow him to continue the professor's work under proper academic oversight. When he came to Baker Street to express his gratitude, Holmes waved aside his thanks with characteristic dismissal. "Do not thank me, Mr. Ashford," said he. "Thank your old master by guarding his legacy with the diligence he prized and the integrity he died defending. Knowledge belongs to humanity, not to those ruthless enough to steal it." The scholar's vindication. Dr. Lionel Markham, whose academic pride had made him such a convenient suspect, proved gracious in vindication. His private note to Holmes confessed that while Professor Blackwood's methods had initially offended his scholarly caution, the results had moved him to that humility which marks the beginning of true wisdom. At the memorial service held in Professor Blackwood's honor, Dr. Markham delivered an address so generous in its tribute that I found myself revising my earlier, somewhat severe estimate of his character. Mr. Elias Mortlake, cleared of all suspicion and freed from his unwitting involvement in his employer's conspiracy, accepted a modest position with a more reputable publishing house. His letter of gratitude spoke movingly of his relief at escaping the shadow of false accusation, while his new employers valued both his editorial skills and his hard-won understanding of the ethical responsibilities that accompany the dissemination of knowledge. Mrs. Pemberton, the professor's loyal housekeeper, provided additional testimony that illuminated the final days of her employer's life. Her account revealed the full extent of his courage and foresight, how he had spent his last evening preparing the blood ink mixture using techniques learned from his study of ancient manuscript preservation, ensuring that his final message would survive the efforts of those who sought to destroy all evidence of their crime. The international dimension. The broader implications of our investigation continued to unfold long after the immediate criminals had been secured. Herr Karl Richter's interrogation, conducted under the auspices of international cooperation, revealed connections to shadowy organizations operating throughout European academic circles. The systematic theft of ancient research, the professional techniques employed, and the sophisticated methods of misdirection all pointed to resources that transcended common criminality. Holmes's analysis of the seized correspondence revealed a network that used the legitimate channels of scholarly publication to move sensitive materials across national boundaries. Names were noted, premises searched, and several gentlemen found foreign climates suddenly more agreeable than London's increasingly vigilant academic community. The corruption of knowledge for strategic advantage represents a threat to the very foundations of human understanding, Holmes observed as we reviewed the final reports. Professor Blackwood's sacrifice was not merely the loss of one scholar, but a battle in the larger war between those who believe wisdom belongs to all humanity and those who would hoard it for personal advantage. Watson's philosophical reflection. As I prepared to record this extraordinary case in my chronicles, I found myself reflecting upon the profound questions it had raised. Holmes had not merely solved a murder, he had exposed an international conspiracy, preserved invaluable ancient knowledge, and vindicated the memory of a scholar who chose death rather than allow his discoveries to be perverted. The case had revealed the ongoing struggle between enlightenment and exploitation, between the noble pursuit of knowledge and its corrupt commercialization. Professor Blackwood's final cipher, written in blood as his last act, had proved to be more than evidence of crime. It was a testament to the enduring power of human courage and intellectual integrity. Yet I could not escape the sobering realization that this victory, significant as it was, represented only one battle in a larger conflict. The forces that had killed Professor Blackwood continued to operate in the shadows of academic respectability, seeking always to transform the instruments of human understanding into weapons of conquest and control. Holmes's final observations, when the last official papers had been signed and Inspector Lestrade had departed with commendations ringing in his ears, I found Holmes at his customary position by the window, his austere profile etched against the pale afternoon light. The Stradivarius lay untouched upon the table, while his chemical apparatus bore the dull sheen of tools temporarily dismissed from service. "You appear unusually contemplative, Holmes," I observed. "You have dismantled a conspiracy, preserved precious knowledge, and seen justice triumphant. Yet you seem almost melancholy in victory." He turned with that half-smile which marked his more philosophical moods. "I am well content with our success, Watson, but the case has reminded me that knowledge is a blade. In wise hands it prunes and cultivates, in ruthless ones it cuts throats. Our professor, whatever his scholarly limitations, loved the light of understanding. Pembroke loved only the shadow that light could cast for his own advantage." Holmes moved to his desk, where a telegram awaited his attention. "Besides, my dear fellow, there is nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact. We were shown the obvious academic quarrel, the obvious publisher's greed, the obvious foreign intrigue. Each element true in itself, yet each serving to conceal the deeper truth. It is refreshing to be reminded that the world remains as wonderfully complicated as ever." The eternal vigil. A day or two later, when the newspapers had exhausted their editorial pronouncements and our stares were no longer besieged by earnest reporters seeking additional details, Holmes permitted himself the luxury of apparent idleness. He lounged in his armchair, eyes closed, the blue smoke of his pipe rising in a thin column as if sketching invisible theorems upon the air. I was deep in the task of transforming my notes into a coherent narrative when Billy burst in with a telegram bearing the unmistakable urgency of a new case. Holmes opened it with the casual interest of a man expecting nothing, but I observed the familiar quickening of attention as he read. "A banker in Threadneedle Street, whose safe produces mysterious melodies at the stroke of midnight," he murmured with evident satisfaction. "How delightfully refreshing after our recent scholarly concerns. Your hat, Watson, the game, as they say, is once again afoot." And so, as so often before, the curtain fell upon one drama, only to rise immediately upon another. If I have dwelt at length upon the tragedy of Professor Armitage Blackwood, it is because his final cipher served as more than a solution to a criminal puzzle. It was a testament to the principle that knowledge belongs not to those who would exploit it, but to humanity itself. The professor's blood-written message had been decoded at last, revealing not only the location of ancient wisdom, but the eternal truth that some things are worth dying to protect. In a world where the pursuit of knowledge increasingly faces corruption by those who mistake information for power, Professor Blackwood's sacrifice stands as a reminder that true scholarship requires not only intelligence but courage, not only curiosity but integrity. Holmes would dismiss such philosophical observations with his characteristic shrug, but I record them nonetheless for the sake of those who may one day need to remember that in Baker Street, at least, there once lived a man who could read what others could not see, and who used that gift in service of justice rather than personal gain. The case of the scholar's last cipher had reached its conclusion, but its lessons would endure as long as human beings sought knowledge and faced the eternal choice between wisdom and exploitation. The serpent had been defeated, but the staff of true learning remained unbroken, ready to support those who would carry forward the professor's noble legacy. A fortnight after Pembroke's conviction, Holmes received a communication that would provide the ultimate vindication of Professor Blackwood's extraordinary foresight. The letter, bearing the distinctive seal of the British Museum's Oriental Department, arrived on a crisp December morning when the fog had lifted sufficiently to reveal London's ancient stones in sharp relief. "Watson," Holmes announced, setting aside his correspondence with evident satisfaction, "we are summoned to witness the final act of Professor Blackwood's scholarly drama. Sir Frederick Barnaby, Keeper of Oriental Antiquities, requests our presence for what he terms a revelation that will reshape our understanding of both ancient wisdom and modern deception." Our journey to Great Russell Street found the museum's great portico, wreathed in winter mist, its classical columns suggesting the permanence of knowledge against the transient nature of those who would corrupt it. We were received by Sir Frederick himself, a lean scholar whose dry manner concealed an enthusiasm that bordered on the boyish, accompanied by Dr. Lionel Markham, whose presence spoke of academic reconciliation, and young Timothy Ashford, whose eyes shone with the hopeful fire that marked the true scholar's inheritance. "Gentlemen," Sir Frederick began as he led us through corridors lined with the treasures of ancient civilizations, "the decipherment of Professor Blackwood's final cipher has yielded results that surpass our most optimistic expectations. The coordinates embedded within his blood-written message have revealed not merely the location of hidden knowledge, but a master stroke of scholarly protection that demonstrates the professor's genius extended far beyond mere academic research. The cipher's dual nature. In the museum's manuscript strongroom, surrounded by the silent testimony of millennia, Holmes examined the fruits of scholarly collaboration. The professor's cipher, when subjected to the combined expertise of the museum's finest minds, had revealed itself as a work of extraordinary sophistication, a message that operated simultaneously on multiple levels of meaning. "Observe, Watson," Holmes said, spreading the decoded cipher alongside the museum's accession records, "how Professor Blackwood achieved what I can only describe as scholarly perfection. These symbols, which we initially interpreted as geographical coordinates, do indeed provide precise location information, but not in the conventional sense." Sir Frederick took up the explanation with evident admiration. "The professor embedded within his Mesopotamian iconography the museum's own cataloging system. These three symbol groups yield the numbers 81, 7, and 1, corresponding to our accession BM 8171. The serpent and staff device, repeated throughout the cipher, indicates not merely authentication, but enumeration, items 362 through 381 in that particular acquisition." Holmes nodded with satisfaction. "The astronomical references provide additional specificity, tray 07 in case B19, using the professor's playful transposition of ancient Mesopotamian measures into our modern administrative system. He transformed the museum's own bureaucratic numerals into the stuff of ancient mystery, ensuring that his greatest discoveries would remain secure within the very institution best equipped to guard them." The hidden archive revealed. What the cipher had led them to discover surpassed even Holmes's expectations. Professor Blackwood, anticipating the danger his research would attract, had systematically deposited his most significant findings with the British Museum under the guise of routine scholarly donations. The materials, catalogued and stored according to standard procedures, had remained invisible to those seeking to exploit them while remaining accessible to legitimate scholarship. The professor's foresight was remarkable, Dr. Markham observed, his earlier skepticism transformed into profound respect. He recognized that his discoveries, mathematical principles, astronomical calculations, and engineering concepts that seemed impossibly advanced for their historical period, would attract attention from those who would pervert knowledge for strategic advantage. Timothy Ashford, whose role in preserving his master's legacy had evolved from frightened assistant to scholarly guardian, produced a leather portfolio containing the professor's final instructions. He established a network of trusted colleagues throughout Europe, each holding pieces of a larger puzzle whose complete solution would revolutionize our understanding of ancient Mesopotamian civilization. The materials themselves were extraordinary. Clay tablets bearing mathematical formulas that anticipated modern engineering principles, astronomical observations of remarkable precision, and, most significantly, detailed records of a lost archive that had preserved scientific knowledge through the collapse of ancient civilizations. The international dimension resolved. Holmes's analysis of the recovered materials revealed the true scope of the conspiracy that had claimed Professor Blackwood's life. The knowledge contained within the hidden archive represented strategic advantages that would have shifted the balance of international power. Navigation techniques, engineering principles, and astronomical calculations that could revolutionize modern military science. Pembroke's network extended throughout European academic circles, Holmes explained, displaying correspondence seized during the arrests. They systematically identified scholars whose research contained strategic value, then employed a combination of commercial pressure and, when necessary, elimination to acquire exclusive control over such knowledge. The foreign agent, Herr Karl Richter, had proved more cooperative under interrogation than his arrogant demeanor had suggested. His revelations exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of several European governments, each seeking to acquire ancient knowledge that could provide strategic advantages in an increasingly competitive international environment. The professor's murder was not an isolated crime, Holmes continued, but part of a systematic campaign to control knowledge that could reshape modern understanding of engineering, navigation, and warfare. His final cipher was designed not merely to preserve his discoveries, but to ensure they would remain accessible only to those who approached them with proper scholarly integrity. Justice and scholarly vindication. The broader implications of our investigation continued to unfold as European authorities, alerted by Scotland Yard's revelations, uncovered similar conspiracies in Paris, Berlin, and Vienna. The systematic corruption of scholarship for strategic advantage had reached epidemic proportions, threatening the very foundations of international academic cooperation. Yet Professor Blackwood's sacrifice had not been in vain. His careful preparation had preserved not only his own discoveries, but the principle that knowledge belongs to humanity rather than to those ruthless enough to steal it. The network of ethical scholars he had established would serve as guardians of ancient wisdom, ensuring its proper dissemination while protecting it from exploitation. Dr. Markham, whose academic pride had made him such a convenient suspect, proved gracious in vindication. "I will champion Professor Blackwood in every journal that will hear me," he declared with the fervor of the converted. "Where I doubted his methods, I shall now repair my skepticism with proper recognition of his genius." Holmes's final deduction. As we prepared to leave the museum's hallowed halls, Holmes paused to deliver his final assessment of the case that had tested both his deductive abilities and his understanding of human nature. "This investigation has reminded me, Watson, that the pursuit of knowledge represents both humanity's greatest achievement and its most dangerous temptation," he observed, his austere profile etched against the winter light filtering through the museum's great windows. Professor Blackwood died defending the principle that wisdom belongs to all mankind, yet his murder demonstrates how easily that noble pursuit can be corrupted by those who mistake information for power. He moved to examine one final tablet, its cuneiform inscription speaking across millennia of human achievement and aspiration. The professor's cipher was his masterpiece, not merely a puzzle to be solved, but a test of scholarly integrity. Only those who approached it with proper reverence for knowledge itself could unlock its secrets. The eternal vigil. As we emerged into the crisp December afternoon, the museum's classical facade fading behind us like a temple glimpsed in a dream, I reflected upon the extraordinary complexity of the case we had concluded. Holmes had not merely solved a murder. He had exposed an international conspiracy, preserved invaluable ancient knowledge, and vindicated the memory of a scholar who chose death rather than allow his discoveries to be perverted. The professor's blood-written cipher had proved to be more than evidence of crime. It was a testament to the enduring power of human courage and intellectual integrity. In an age when the pursuit of knowledge increasingly faced corruption by those who would exploit it for strategic advantage, Professor Blackwood's sacrifice stood as a reminder that true scholarship required not only intelligence but courage, not only curiosity but integrity. The forces that seek to control and exploit knowledge are as ancient as humanity itself, Holmes observed as our hansom carried us back toward Baker Street. We have won this particular battle, but the war between wisdom and exploitation continues. That is the nature of existence, and indeed, the very challenge that makes our work worthwhile. Watson's concluding reflection. As I prepared to close this chronicle of our most intellectually challenging case, I found myself contemplating the broader lessons it had revealed. The quiet world of scholarship, which many consider removed from the practical concerns of criminal investigation, had proved to contain mysteries as complex and dangerous as any we had encountered in London's fog-shrouded streets. Professor Armitage Blackwood's final cipher had been decoded at last, revealing not only the location of ancient wisdom, but the eternal truth that some things are worth dying to protect. The scholar's testament would endure as long as human beings sought knowledge and faced the eternal choice between wisdom and exploitation. Mrs. Hudson's familiar footsteps on our stairs announced the arrival of a fresh telegram, another mystery awaiting our attention, another puzzle demanding the application of Holmes's remarkable intellect. The game was indeed eternal, but so too was the satisfaction of seeing justice triumph over corruption, truth over deception, and the noble pursuit of knowledge over its base exploitation. In Baker Street, at least, there would always be a man who could read what others could not see, and who would use that gift in service of principles that transcended personal gain. The serpent had been defeated, but the staff of true learning remained unbroken, ready to support those who would carry forward Professor Blackwood's noble legacy into whatever mysteries the future might hold. The spring of 1890 brought to London an unusual clarity of air, as if the very atmosphere had been purified by the winter's revelations. Our Baker Street quarters, which had so recently served as headquarters for the pursuit of international conspiracy, now basked in the gentle light of a case concluded with justice triumphant. Holmes, who could alternate between the restless energy of a hunting hound and the contemplative stillness of a scholar, had chosen the latter course, dividing his time between his violin, a monograph on the chemical analysis of ancient inks, and correspondence with learned institutions across Europe. It was on such a morning, when even the dome of St. Paul's shone clear against the pale sky, that Mrs. Hudson announced a visitor whose presence would provide the ultimate vindication of Professor Blackwood's extraordinary sacrifice. "Professor Reginald Thornbury from Cambridge to see you, gentlemen," she announced with that particular note of respect reserved for distinguished academics. "Says he represents the Blackwood Memorial Committee and bears news of considerable importance." The gentleman who entered possessed that combination of scholarly dignity and practical energy which marked the finest representatives of British archaeology. His weather-beaten features spoke of expeditions to distant lands, while his careful handling of a leather portfolio suggested familiarity with precious antiquities. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he began, settling into his chair with the reverent care of one accustomed to handling fragile treasures. "I come bearing news that will, I believe, provide the ultimate vindication of both Professor Blackwood's genius and your remarkable investigation." Holmes set aside his morning correspondence, his gray eyes immediately alert to the significance of our visitor's presence. "The Mesopotamian expedition has yielded results, Professor?" "Beyond our most optimistic expectations," Thornbury confirmed, opening his portfolio to reveal photographic reproductions that would have made any scholar's pulse quicken. "The coordinates embedded within Professor Blackwood's cipher have led to the discovery of what can only be described as the most significant archaeological find of our generation. The archaeological triumph. The expedition's findings surpassed even Holmes's expectations for scholarly vindication. Following the precise coordinates decoded from the professor's blood-written message, the archaeological team had uncovered a carefully concealed chamber containing thousands of clay tablets, astronomical instruments, and mathematical calculations that demonstrated a level of ancient knowledge previously thought impossible. "The preservation is extraordinary," Professor Thornbury explained, displaying images of tablets whose cuneiform inscriptions appeared as fresh as if carved yesterday. Professor Blackwood's cipher indicated not merely the location of these materials, but the specific environmental conditions necessary for their survival. The chamber was sealed using techniques that created perfect preservation, controlled humidity, stable temperature, and protection from the elements. Holmes examined the photographs with characteristic precision, his sharp eyes noting details that escaped casual observation. The engineering principles alone will revolutionize our understanding of ancient capabilities, he observed, indicating mathematical formulas that anticipated modern structural techniques. Indeed, we have found astronomical observations of remarkable precision, engineering concepts centuries ahead of their time, and most significantly, detailed records of a lost civilization that possessed scientific knowledge which rivals our own modern understanding. The professor's final gambit had achieved something far greater than the preservation of his own discoveries. It had unlocked secrets that would benefit all humanity while ensuring they remained beyond the reach of those who would exploit them for strategic advantage. The international resolution. The broader implications of our investigation had continued to unfold across European academic circles, with results that validated Professor Blackwood's ultimate sacrifice. The exposure of Pembroke's conspiracy had triggered comprehensive reforms in scholarly publishing, while international agreements had been established to prevent the exploitation of archaeological discoveries for strategic purposes. The Blackwood Protocols, as they have come to be known, Professor Thornbury continued with evident satisfaction, establish international standards for the ethical treatment of archaeological discoveries. All signatory nations have agreed that ancient knowledge belongs to humanity as a whole, not to individual governments or commercial interests. Holmes nodded with that quiet satisfaction which marked his finest achievements. Professor Blackwood's death has accomplished something far greater than the preservation of ancient tablets. It has established principles that will protect future archaeological research from similar corruption. The foreign agent, Herr Karl Richter, had proved instrumental in exposing the full scope of the international conspiracy. His cooperation with authorities had revealed networks operating throughout Europe, each seeking to acquire ancient knowledge for strategic purposes. The systematic dismantling of these organizations had restored integrity to academic circles while ensuring that future discoveries would be shared rather than hoarded. Personal vindications. Young Timothy Ashford had found his ordeal transformed into opportunity beyond his most optimistic expectations. The British Museum, recognizing both his courage during our investigation and his meticulous preservation of the professor's research, had appointed him to lead a new department devoted to the ethical study and dissemination of ancient knowledge. Mr. Ashford has proved himself worthy of his master's trust, Professor Thornbury observed with evident approval. His work in cataloguing and interpreting the Mesopotamian discoveries has established him as a scholar of considerable promise, while his first-hand experience of academic corruption has made him a passionate advocate for scholarly integrity. Dr. Lionel Markham, whose academic pride had made him such a convenient suspect, had emerged from the investigation with his reputation not merely restored, but enhanced. His gracious acknowledgement of his initial skepticism regarding Professor Blackwood's theories had earned him widespread respect within academic circles, while his subsequent championing of the professor's work had helped establish the international protocols that now protected archaeological research. Even Mr. Elias Mortlake, cleared of all suspicion and freed from his unwitting involvement in his employer's conspiracy, had found redemption through his new position with a more reputable publishing house. His editorial skills continued to serve legitimate research, while his experience had transformed him into a vigilant guardian against academic exploitation. The scholar's final testament. As Professor Thornbury prepared to conclude his visit, he produced from his portfolio a small packet bearing the distinctive seal of the British Museum. Among Professor Blackwood's deposited effects, we discovered this, marked for delivery to the gentleman who reads what others do not see. I presumed such a description could have but one address in London. Holmes accepted the packet with reverent care, unfolding its contents to reveal a tablet rubbing inscribed with a prayer to Ningish Zida, the ancient patron of scribes, interlaced with marginalia in the professor's precise hand. The marginal note was simple, yet profoundly moving. "If I fall, let the reader of signs know I trusted to the old faith. That knowledge should stand where all may see it." The message represented Professor Blackwood's final testament, not merely instructions for preserving his discoveries, but a declaration of the principles that had guided his life and ultimately claimed it. Knowledge belonged to humanity, not to those who would corrupt it for personal advantage. Holmes's philosophical reflection. After Professor Thornbury's departure, Holmes stood by our familiar window, his austere profile etched against the spring light that illuminated the bustling life of Baker Street. His contemplation of the case's broader implications revealed that rare philosophical dimension which elevated his work beyond mere criminal investigation. "This case has reminded me, Watson, that knowledge represents both humanity's greatest achievement and its most dangerous temptation," he observed, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. Professor Blackwood died defending the principle that wisdom belongs to all mankind, yet his murder demonstrated how easily that noble pursuit can be corrupted by those who mistake information for power. He moved to the mantelpiece, where he placed the professor's final message beside the original blood-written cipher. The professor's masterpiece was not merely a puzzle to be solved, but a test of scholarly integrity. Only those who approached it with proper reverence for knowledge itself could unlock its secrets. The case had demonstrated that the corruption of knowledge for personal advantage represented a threat to the very foundations of human understanding, while the courage of scholars like Professor Blackwood provided hope that integrity would ultimately triumph over exploitation. The eternal vigil. As afternoon shadows lengthened across our quarters, Holmes reflected upon the enduring nature of the struggle we had witnessed. "The forces that seek to control and exploit knowledge are as ancient as humanity itself," he observed with characteristic precision. "We have won this particular battle, but the war between wisdom and exploitation continues. That is the nature of existence, and indeed the very challenge that makes our work worthwhile." The evening's post brought final confirmation of Pembroke's transportation and news that the international conspiracy he had served had been thoroughly dismantled. Yet Holmes showed no satisfaction in personal triumph, only the quiet contentment of one who had helped preserve something precious for future generations. Inspector Lestrade's subsequent visit brought official commendations and rumors of royal recognition, all of which Holmes dismissed with characteristic disdain. "The pursuit itself is its own reward, Inspector," he observed with that wry smile which marked his finest moments. Besides, Professor Blackwood's vindication provides satisfaction far greater than any parchment bearing official seals. Watson's concluding reflection. As I prepared to close this chronicle of our most intellectually challenging case, I found myself contemplating the profound questions it had raised about the relationship between knowledge and power, wisdom and exploitation, courage and corruption. Holmes had not merely solved a murder, he had exposed an international conspiracy, preserved invaluable ancient knowledge, and established principles that would protect future scholarship from similar threats. Professor Armitage Blackwood's final cipher had been decoded at last, revealing not only the location of ancient wisdom, but the eternal truth that some things are worth dying to protect. The scholar's testament would endure as long as human beings sought knowledge and faced the eternal choice between noble pursuit and base exploitation. The quiet world of scholarship, often perceived as removed from the practical concerns of criminal investigation, had proved to contain mysteries as complex and dangerous as any we had encountered in London's fog-shrouded streets. Yet it had also demonstrated that the pursuit of truth, when guided by integrity and courage, possessed the power to triumph over even the most sophisticated corruption. The game continues. Mrs. Hudson's familiar knock announced the arrival of fresh correspondence. Another mystery awaiting our attention, another puzzle demanding the application of Holmes's remarkable intellect. The consulting detective showed no inclination to rest upon his laurels, but rather the eager anticipation of one who understood that the pursuit of truth was itself an endless adventure. "Come, Watson," Holmes said, reaching for his coat with renewed energy as he scanned the telegram's contents. A most curious affair in Surrey. A banker's safe that produces mysterious melodies at the stroke of midnight, while its owner swears he has never heard the tunes before. The local constabulary are naturally entirely baffled. He turned to me with that familiar glint of intellectual excitement that had marked the beginning of so many adventures. "Your hat, my dear fellow. The game is eternal, and there are always new mysteries to unravel. Professor Blackwood's legacy is secure, but London's criminal classes show no signs of taking permanent holiday." And so, as so often before, one case concluded only to give way to another, each presenting its own unique challenges and rewards. Yet the memory of Professor Blackwood's courage would remain with us, a reminder that in a world where knowledge faced constant threats from those who would corrupt it, there would always be those willing to sacrifice everything to preserve the light of human understanding. The scholar's last cipher had been decoded, its secrets revealed, and its message would echo through the halls of legitimate scholarship for generations to come. In Baker Street, at least, there would always be a man who could read what others could not see, and who would use that gift in service of principles that transcended personal gain. The serpent had been defeated, but the staff of true learning remained unbroken, ready to support those who would carry forward the noble pursuit of knowledge into whatever mysteries the future might hold. The game was indeed afoot, and would remain so as long as human curiosity and criminal ingenuity continued their eternal dance through the streets of London and beyond.